So welcome everybody to another Behind the Theme. Today we end the series on Hammer the Scots with focus on the Battle of Bannockburn. So let's get into it. Last we left off, the deal to relieve the siege of Stirling Castle was underway, and Edward II called the feudal host. Now the feudal host is basically the King of England calling on all knights, barons, lords, together all healthy men between 16 to 60. From all the lands, including Wales, Ireland, the continent of England itself, to fight for him, and thus provide the King of England with a sizable army. And even with opposition from lords providing less than they should, actually quite openly, especially the more powerful ones, Edward II still managed to gather about 20,000 men or the 29,000 he expected. This army was so large that one account said that the procession of it was 20 miles long. And the army had taken so long to gather due to complications and just the logistics of it all, that it literally arrived 2 days before the deadline of midsummer at Stirling. Absolutely tired. But what were the Scots doing in all this time? Now they weren't idle. Robert had gathered up his troops and set about training them to use the skill formation and also to move while in formation more effectively. And little fighting tips like planting the pike into the ground and stepping on it at its end to keep the pike steady even against a heavy cavalry charge. And this training would be pretty important as the Scots were outnumbered basically 2 to 1. Add to that the fact that the Scots had no heavy cavalry but 500 light cavalry, and that is because most of the Scottish knights were actually fighting on the English side. Now the terrain of Scotland meant that Robert knew the exact route the English would come by, and this rough terrain is easily represented in the limitations the game has for moving troops through borders in the game, green or red. And thus, Robert prepared the ground with rocks, fallen trees to funnel the English into the death zone or caltrops, pits with spikes in them, and so on. And he did this along the old Roman road, which he knew they would come by. Now, the thing that most people don't know is that the Battle of Bannockburn was a 2-day affair. And on the first day, it started with the tired English army setting up to attack the Scots along that old Roman road I talked about. This is one of the more famous stories of the battle. Is during the setup, a knight of the English called Sir Henry de Bohun sees Robert on his smaller horse, open and lightly armored, inspecting his men, and decides to immortalize himself by killing Robert the Bruce and charges with his destrier. Now Robert sees this and knows he can't outrun the destrier with his little horse, probably a pony but I can't confirm that, and instead turns around to face the Bohun with his axe. And I guess the years of experience pays off because he not only manages to dodge the Bohun's attack but also hits him so hard in the head with his axe that it breaks, and of course killing the Bohun. He is then alleged to have said that horrible English knight has ruined a perfectly good axe with his horrible English face. And although this had great morale effect for the Scots, the Bruce's right-hand man, the Black Douglas, whose father James Douglas actually fought with William Wallace, did reprimand his king for the recklessness of that attack, as one must understand, and rightfully so, that if the Bohun had lucked out and killed Robert the Bruce, it didn't matter that the army still remained, it meant that the English had basically won. After which, the battle began, and the first day went as planned for the Scots, with the English unable to beat the Scots. That being said, the English were beaten, but not out. Instead, Edward II, not wanting to attack the same death zone again, the next day decides to swerve his army right along the River Forth, and then decides to order the disastrous crossing of the River Forth before they could rest, which of course turned into total chaos and meant that his already tired army had even less time to rest and could hardly even sleep in the wet, muddy conditions they were in. This in fact led to a fight in the middle of the night of the Welsh who drank too much. This whole chaos and ill discipline in the English army so disgusted a Scottish knight fighting on the English side, Sir Alexander Seton, that he decided to switch sides and went to tell the Bruce how bad the state of the English army was. This is important as the Bruce was actually deciding whether he should fight. Now the safe bet of course would have been to run and continue his guerrilla campaign as it has been working for him. Now after deciding to fight, the Bruce's first order the next day was to knight the Black Douglas, possibly as an incentive for the other troops too, but also importantly as if they did not win, everyone knew that the titles that Robert gave out stand for nothing, and any other rewards he promises. It's at this point that all the Scots then knelt to pray. Now, across the field, Edward II was actually reminded by the Constable of Stirling that he did not need to fight, as he had already released Stirling Castle. Of which, of course, even I can understand that Edward II ignored this view, as if he could beat, kill, or capture Robert the Bruce, Scotland would be more securely a part of England. And in fact, when Edward II saw that the Scots were kneeling, he actually thought they were surrendering. I mean, a lot of sources make fun of this, but at the same time, you have to understand that most people also thought that this English would never lose. Was it totally unfounded? I would say no, but at the same time, was it hubris? Yes. Now, of course, that view of the Scots surrendering all changed when the Scots advanced in their Skiltron formation. Now, the plan of the Scots was, like William Wallace, to compact the English between the tight area between them and the River Forth. Also, the rough terrain of the area was bad for heavy cavalry, and by compacting the English, the superior numbers of the English counted for little. The English plan, on the other hand, was non-existent, as they were so compacted by the space that they had that the army literally just formed up as best it could and had the knights in the front, the archers behind the knights, and the billmen behind them. Now, as the battle started, the knights failed to break the Skiltrons, and so desperate was the English position then that an order came down for the English archers to actually shoot over their own knights, of which of course there was friendly fire. And you have to remember, some of these are the nobility of England. Now, at one point, a group of archers actually managed to get to a flank and shoot into the Skiltrons without any worry. But this is when Robert ordered his 500 light cavalry to charge and scatter them, thus removing the only real threat to the Skiltrons by this point, and also showing that his years of fighting paid off dividends with his ability to command a battle effectively, unlike Edward II. Now, the Scots were winning, but the English had not given up. This, of course, changed when the small folk arrived. Now, who were these small folks? No one can really confirm, but some sources say that these were actually the camp followers who saw that the English were beat and wanted their claim of the loot. And another says that it could actually have been reinforcements that turned up late and decided to join the battle, or a mix of the two. Regardless, the English troops thought that it was a second full army that turned up against them, and a total rout stampede ensued back into the River Forth. Edward II, although no great general, was actually brave, as he actually refused to flee the battle and literally had to be led away by Sir Giles Dalbolton, who pulled Edward II to safety and is then alleged to have said, "I have never been accustomed to run," and went back into the fight and died. A brave knight and man indeed. Now, with this rout of this army, Edward II retreated to Stirling Castle, whose constables, seeing the tide turn to Robert the Bruce for the war, decided to deny access to Edward II, and in the end, Edward II got on a ship in what must have been a very awkward sail home. Compound to that his army's baggage train was captured when Edward II got back to England, and so unpopular was he that in the end, Isabella, his wife, and with the support of the nobility, actually deposed Edward II and by all accounts tried to starve him to death, and when that failed, decided to kill him by sticking a red-hot poker up his rectum, saying that because it left no blows to his body, and also it harkens to that allegation of homosexuality. How true this is, we don't know, but the fact is that Edward II died. Now, even though Bannockburn solidified Scottish independence for the most part, it had to be noted that the Bruce actually continued to fight for another 14 years after the battle, until 1327, when a treaty was signed by the English recognizing Scottish sovereignty. In that preceding period of those 14 years, the Declaration of Arbroath was also sent to the Pope. Now, the declaration, Scotland was a sovereign nation, and it had clauses like if Robert the Bruce or the King ever was to give up Scottish sovereignty, he would be removed, and it would be lawful. Now, the interesting thing of the clauses in the Declaration of Arbroath is also, like most laws from Japan's Hideyoshi and all, these declarations also prevented the nobles from acting against Scottish independence, meaning that basically Robert had blocked legally the way for any noble to get the crown like he did. Robert died in 1329, and fun fact is that he actually got leprosy. And if you remember, in the movie Braveheart, the leprosy was given to the father of Robert the Bruce, but in real life, it was Robert the Bruce himself who suffered from leprosy. It's of course then that his death wish was followed through and that his heart was put in a box and taken on crusade by the Black Douglas, who actually died there along with all his men, thus ending the Scottish First War of Independence. Now the irony of the whole war is that in the end, a descendant of Robert the Bruce, James VI, would be the one to unite both England and Scotland, unlike what most people would have thought that would have been an English king. Now it's been an interesting journey, to say the least, but in the end, a small commentary would be that Wallace, according to the sources we have, probably was a very patriotic man and a very good man, but lacking in the ruthlessness needed to really unite Scotland. Robert the Bruce, although I acknowledge his brilliance in getting what he wants in the end, was hardly trustworthy and somebody that I would always have one eye open against. And if you're interested, actually the Hammer of Scots board game actually allows you to play either the Wallace campaign or the Robert the Bruce campaign separately. And those actually take a reasonable time, they don't take forever. And if you want a longer game, you could actually play both campaigns straight up, all the way. And it can even go beyond the historical period. Now that being said, even if you play both together, it does so very, very well thematically. Everything feels right, as I've been saying throughout the series. And actually you merge it together, although it is long, it's not as long as most war games that make you play an entire campaign. And there is luck in the dice rolls of the game and everything, but as we have seen, luck played a lot of part in Robert the Bruce winning the wars. So actually the whole game is very thematic and gives a great story when you finish. Well, so that's it. Thank you very much. Comment, subscribe, let me know what you think, and till next word.